Up until this point, we haven't written any code really. You've seen me write a little bit. I've talked about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We know how they fit together now. And we've installed Sublime Text in preparation for writing code. And now we finally get to start writing code. So there are 2 units about HTML, this one and then the following unit. And in this first one, there are 3 main things that I want to talk about around HTML. The first is that by the end of this unit, I want you to be able to write your own properly structured HTML documents. So there's a set of tags or some code that every HTML document must have. There's a set of rules we have to follow. So that's the first thing I want you to be able to do. Then we're going to talk about different types of tags. So I'm going to introduce some of the common HTML tags, common elements of 2 different varieties, closing and self-closing tags. So I want you to be able to understand and define the difference between the 2, and I want you to be able to use the 2 types inside of your documents. And then the last thing is that at the very end of this unit, I'm going to give you a small project. It's really more of an exercise than a project, but these will get more and more complicated, more exciting, definitely more styled towards the end of the class. But to start, it's going to be pretty simple. And the idea is that you can use this assignment to assess your progress. So I'm going to give you a photo of a website that I've made. And website is pretty generous. It's really just a simple web page, no styling, pure HTML. You're going to take it and you're going to have to figure out exactly how to recreate that website using HTML. So from a photo, recreate a website. And that will be the last thing we do in the unit before we move on to more advanced HTML in Unit 4. All right, let's get started. Okay, welcome back. So now is the time where we finally get to start actually writing some code. And we're going to start by talking about HTML. In the next unit, we're going to cover a lot of different parts of HTML. We're going to learn by the end how to write simple HTML documents. We want to understand the difference between closing and self-closing tags, tags with attributes. We want to definitely use MDN a lot, which you've already seen. And at the very end, I'll give you an image of a website, and you should be able to write the corresponding HTML. So translate an image to actual code. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about the history of HTML. So again, it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Think back to that first introduction to front-end video. HTML is the structure and content of a page, not the styling, not the interactivity, just the structure and content. Back in the academic community in the year 1989, early 1990, there's not exactly a hard start date to HTML. But in that time, basically people were exchanging papers, giant thesis papers and scientific documents, technical documents, and they all have very specific formatting. But when they're being exchanged, there was no way to actually send that formatting across the internet. So what I mean is, let's say you wanted to have a paper that looked like this. And this is a style guide that I found on writing scientific papers. So let's just take the abstract section. So your abstract looks like there's a heading here. It's a little bolded and bigger text. We've got this sort of introduction to one part of the abstract and then a bunch of bullet points. We've got italicized and bolded text, and then it looks like a link to another part of the paper. And then lastly, we've got some nested bullet points. So this information, if I wanted to send this to somebody, but all that I could send is text. So I can't send an image of this. I can't send like the actual structure of it. All I can send is some text. So that might look something like this. The problem is, how do I take this text here, which is the same text as over here, and how do I encode the structure? How do I say this abstract, which I actually don't have here, but if I added that in, how would I say this is bold and bigger text? And so is function. And there's a bullet point right here, and another bullet point right here. So that is what HTML lets us do. It lets us take text and content, and just by writing some other text on top of it, it lets us specify exactly this is a heading, this is bold, this is italicized, this is a link. And that last part, link, is actually really important. That's where the name comes from, Hypertext Markup Language, because HTML allows us to create hyperlinks, and linking documents together is really important. Many scientific papers are going to be referencing other scientific papers, footnotes, and all sorts of citations. HTML facilitated that and made a really big impact. And then it basically caught on. People realized it's pretty simple. It's not a very intimidating thing. So it moved kind of away from purely academic situations to kind of broader use. All the way up to MySpace. If you remember MySpace, or if you ever had a MySpace, you could actually edit your profile just by writing HTML. So there were people who were absolutely not technical, and they were still able to write HTML and CSS to add some interesting features to the page, to make some customized visuals. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. We have this giant thing of text that we want to be able to encode some structure in. I want to say, this is bold, or this is a bullet point, and so on. HTML allows us to do that using HTML tags. So what we basically do is we take some content in the middle and we sandwich it between an opening tag and a closing tag. This lets me specify specific parts of the page or of the paragraph or the content that I could say right in between these two tags is a bold, right between these two is a link, right between these two is italicized text, and so on. So I'll show you that. We could go through here and decide, okay, this is going to be a heading on our page, and we'll wrap it in an H1 tag, which we haven't introduced yet. We will get there, but for now, it lets us specify that this is the largest heading on our page. The next thing we might want to do is go ahead and make this bolded here. So the way that we make things bold, there's a few. The simplest one is to wrap it in something called a B tag to say that it's bold. For those of you who know HTML, the B tag is actually on its way out. It's being deprecated, which means that you're not supposed to use it anymore. It works just fine. There is an alternative we'll discuss in a little bit. Likewise, I might want to make something, let's say, a separate paragraph. So I wanted to add some spacing between it. This line and the next line. So I add a paragraph. And what that will do is whatever's between these two tags goes on its own line. It has basically returns on either side. So as you can see, the general rule applies to all the tags that we've seen, where we had an H1 or a bold tag or a paragraph tag. Don't focus on the tags themselves just yet. We're going to have plenty of videos discussing the individual ins and outs of all the tags. But again, remember this pattern. We have tag name starting, tag name closing, some content in between. Okay, so in the next video, we're now going to actually make a new real HTML file, not just a scientific document with some text, but a real file, and we're going to open it in the browser and actually see the HTML. Okay, so before we actually get started writing any code, I want to take a moment to highlight a really important resource, which is something called Mozilla Developer Network, or MDN for short. So to get there, I often just end up typing MDN as I'm searching something. So let's say I wanted to know how functions worked in JavaScript. I might say MDN functions, and then click on one of these links. It's just a really, really good resource for everything around HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So the reason I'm showing it to you is we're going to use it a lot and refer back to it. It's sort of going to be our encyclopedia of knowledge and examples. Lots and lots of real developers use MDN. It's an excellent resource for students. It has lots of tutorials and demos, and it's an excellent resource for serious developers who just need a reference. While we have it open, I'll show you a little bit about it. So we want to focus mainly on this web platform side of things. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if you take a look at the HTML page, we've got a bunch of things, including a reference, which we're going to see in a little bit, a guide to HTML and some tutorials, and a great introduction. So I actually recommend that you pause the video here and you read this entire introduction. It's not very long. It's a great intro to everything that we're going to talk about in the next few videos. One thing that I always recommend is that you do a little reading before the videos, especially for some of the more advanced topics and newer topics. Do some reading before them so that when you watch the videos, you're able to draw some connections from something you've already read to something that I'm mentioning or some code that I'm showing you. So in summary though, MDN, excellent resource. You could spend hours and hours on here. We will in the class. Highly recommend that you just get in the habit of typing MDN in your Google searches or going to developer.mozilla.org. Welcome back. So in this lesson, we're going to start by making a new file, actually filling it with HTML and opening it in the browser. And we're also going to learn about the underlying structure of every HTML document. So there's a few things that every document always has, kind of boilerplate, that we're going to learn about. So to start, I'm going to go to Sublime, and I'm going to make a new file. So File, New File, or Command N, and then I'm going to save the file and give it a name. So File, Save, or Command S. So once I do that, we're going to give it a name. Let's call it firstpage.html. And this part is very important, .html. So I'll hit save. And that .html tells Sublime, and when I open it in Chrome, it tells Chrome this is an HTML file, treat it as such. So we can write some HTML in here. So we'll start with just the one tag we've seen so far, or one of the tags, which is an H1. And you'll notice that it's highlighted for me. So let's fill this in. This is my first tag, and save this file. And you'll see Sublime knows it's HTML, so it highlights it, makes corresponding tags red in my case. Now what we want to do is actually open this file and view it. Because remember, HTML is just text, but our browser interprets it and turns it into something like this, or this. So to actually get Chrome to open it, there's a few solutions. The first one is just double click on it, and it will open it in your default browser. If that is not Chrome, it will still work, but it will open it in Safari or Firefox or Internet Explorer. And you can see though, as it opens it, it's not showing me the actual HTML. It is taking the HTML underlying it and turning it into this nice visual representation. As always, I can view my page source, and you'll see it's just one tag. So definitely simpler than something like this, but underlying they're exactly the same. And there's probably an H1 on this page as well. So one other way of doing this, you can take the file, right click and click on Open with Google Chrome, or you can click on it and drag it to Chrome, and that will open it as well. Same thing goes for Sublime as well. So if you accidentally close the file, you can drag it here and it will reopen it. So just to show you that, click, and I can open it. So unfortunately, I have to break the news that our simple HTML that we've written so far is actually slightly wrong. The HTML tag itself is fine, but this isn't a valid document. And that's because we're missing the underlying structure that every page needs to have. So it looks like this. It is a lot compared to what we've done so far, but the good news is there's two pieces of good news. One, it's always the same. And two, Sublime has a nice shortcut that gives this structure to us very, very quickly with just 4 letters that we have to type. So we're going to go over these pieces individually in just a little bit, but I'm going to start by just showing you how to get it in Sublime. So in Sublime, inside a HTML file, we can type the word HTML and then hit tab, and we automatically get this structure. So let's go over what this does. First, I'm going to save. So there's this doc type HTML up top. And it's kind of weird because there isn't a corresponding closing doc type, like there is HTML and head and title and body. Doc type is on its own. So let's go to MDN, just showing you how you would get there. I would type MDN and then doc type. And it might seem silly to really talk about that, but this is important because finding this information out is really what being a developer is. Googling something, how do you find the right answer? I'm going to be a complete broken record on that. My students laugh every time I talk about the art of Googling, but it really is important. So on here, let's take a look. It says the doc type for HTML5 is simple. To indicate that your HTML content uses HTML5, simply use doc type HTML with an exclamation point in front of it. And we do want to use HTML5. We'll talk exactly about what HTML5 is and what it isn't in a future video, but we do want to use it. It's basically just the newest version of HTML. So we put this up top. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the HTML element. So this one is a little harder to find by searching. We would do MDN, HTML, maybe just element. There we go. Always look for this MDN in the name. And this tells us the HTML root element represents the root of an HTML document. All other elements must be descendants of this element. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, everything that we write needs to go inside of the HTML element. And more importantly, under permitted content, it tells us one head element followed by one body, which is what we have, one head and one body. So let's take a look at what head is. The head element provides general information, metadata about the document, including its title and links to or definitions of scripts and style sheets. So what that means is basically everything that we don't see on the page as a user, so things like font files and our style sheet files, our JavaScript files, all of those go in the head. And then the body is where we put all of our content. It represents the content of an HTML document. So if we go back here, I'm going to show you one more thing, which is how to write comments in HTML. If I wanted to write a note to myself, if I just wrote this, content goes in the body, and then up here I wrote metadata goes in head. Unfortunately, that won't work because this will actually show up on the page. HTML will treat this like text, and I want it just to be a note to myself. So this is something you can do in every programming language. You can turn this into a comment. And a comment looks just like this. Starts with a less than sign, exclamation point, 2 dashes, and then some content. And then on the other side, 2 dashes and a greater than sign. So you can type that here yourself, type it manually. And you can see it kind of goes gray in Sublime. But another really nifty shortcut is that you can select a line. You don't even have to select it, just go to a line and hit Command/. And you can also see, you can go up to Edit, and you can go to Comment, Toggle Comment. So in case you forget this and you don't want to write it out, another nice thing, let's say I had a bunch of notes to myself, I can select all of them and do the same thing, Command/. Great. So I'm going to keep these comments here that are just notes to myself. My content goes in the body, metadata goes in the head. So that means that if we're following our own notes, our content here needs to go inside of our body. So we should have nothing floating around outside the HTML element except for doc type. Everything else goes in head or in body. So let's go ahead and open this up, make sure it looks the same as it did before. Double click, you can see it looks identical. Let's view the page source, it looks the same. Notice that our comments are not showing up, of course, only our H1 shows up. One thing that we're missing while we're here is a title. A title is important not because it shows up on the page. It will not show up in our actual page here. Remember, it's in the head, so it's just metadata. What it does do is two things. One, it's going to determine the name or the text that goes in our tab up here. And it's also important for search engines and for other pages. When other pages link to your site, or when you go to Google and you search for MDN, these names here, these come from the title elements. So for instance, MDN celebrates 10 years of documenting your web. You click on that. You can see up here, it says MDN celebrates, it gets cut off. We can inspect the page, look for a title element. So a lot of stuff, here we go. Title, MDN celebrates 10 years of documenting your web, the Mozilla blog. So title is important. So let's give our site a title. Let's just call it My First Page. Refresh, watch right here, and it updates. So that's it for now. Remember two things. This boilerplate, you can just type HTML tab. You would never have more than one in a document. But just so you remember, HTML tab and comments you can do with Command/. You can toggle them on and off. All right. So in this video, we're going to learn about a few more HTML elements that are pretty common. So we've seen how to write comments, we've seen head and body, doc type, and HTML, as well as H1. Now we're going to learn about a bunch more things that can go in the body. So in the slides, there's a little cheat sheet here of some of the things that we're going to cover. So we'll be referring back to this in a little bit. But before then, I want to show you the MDN element reference. So this link is in the description. It's also in the slides. You could also just get there by Googling MDN element reference. And it's basically a web page that lists all the elements in HTML. So some people are surprised at how many there are. Other people, other students that I've had are surprised at how few there are. There's around, and this is just a guess, I haven't counted, but around 100 or so. This page has all of them. You can read about every single one. So, we could search for body, and we could read about body, which we've already done. What I want to show you though, is that there are a ton here. There are probably 10 to 15 that you'll use all the time. I'd say I've used about half of these in the last few months. None of these really. What I'm trying to say is there's a lot of things here. Don't feel like you need to know all of this. This is one of those times where I'm going to tell you it's not about memorization. Let's go back to our H1 and let's do a little bit of reading about H1s. So I'm just going to search on here for H1, click on the corresponding link, and basically an H1 down to an H6 are the 6 levels of document headings. So an H1 is going to be the most important heading on your page. It's the largest heading, down to an H6, which is still a heading, but it's the least important heading. So you can see there's an example here. H1, H2, H3, all the way down to H6. This is the resulting HTML. So here's another example here, where we've got some H1s and some other tags, and we end up with this, a heading element. We'll go ahead and make a few more H1s. I'm sorry, a few more heading elements. So we'll do an H2. We won't do all of them. And we'll do one more. And let's change this to be an H3. Let's do actually an H6 so you can see how small they get. And let's save that. Go ahead and open up our page again. And you can see that we have a large heading, a slightly smaller heading, and this absolute smallest heading that we can go. So one other thing about H1s and other headings is that they are something called block level elements. So what that means is each one gets its own line. So even if I put them all in the same line and I refresh the page, every one of them gets a separate line and pushes everything after it to a new line. So this is important. This will come up because there are going to be other elements that do not behave this way, and those are called inline elements. Okay, so I'm going to undo that, make sure we have this spaced correctly. Let's go ahead and add some text here. So I'm going to, let's say that this is just a little bio, so I'm going to put some text here. This is some text, blah, blah, blah. And this, I just want to be regular text. I don't want it to be big or highlighted or anything. So I could just write text like this. I'm just going to add a bunch more here. And I refresh my page and I get this giant thing of text on one line. But let's say that I realize I actually want a line break right here. These are 2 paragraphs of nonsense. To do that, I can use the paragraph tag. So if we went back here and we searched for the P tag, you'll see that the P tag is just used to represent a paragraph of text, and paragraphs are block level elements. So that means that they also go on their own line. So let's add a paragraph in here. So I want to split here and here. Sorry, here. So I just wrap this in a paragraph tag like so. And then I'll add another paragraph tag in front of this. And afterwards, there we go. Make sure we save that. And we refresh. And now we have 2 paragraphs that are on separate lines. So let me go and get some text. Let's just do lorem ipsum. Go to a generator, and let's just pull a bunch of text here and copy this over. So you can see when we have something longer like that, it's actually a paragraph. So it's not just one line, but it's a paragraph and it has spacing after it before the next paragraph. So now that I have my paragraph here, let's suppose that I wanted to make some text stand out. I want to italicize the title of a book, or I want to bold a keyword, for instance. So there are ways of doing that with HTML. I'll show you one here. Let's say I want to make simply dummy text bolded. So to do that, I could write a B tag around it. And as I mentioned earlier, this is actually not the best way of doing this anymore, but I'm going to show it to you here briefly just so you can see it. So I refresh the page and you can see simply dummy text is bolded. And more importantly, or equally importantly, it doesn't take up a new line. It's still in line. So there is something called a block level element, which we talked about. These take up their own block level. This paragraph does. This takes up its own block. And there are inline elements that just slip in and won't actually force something down to a new line. So if we go back, I did say it's not really the best way of doing it anymore. We're going to talk about that in a future video about semantic markup. Basically in HTML5, your HTML now needs to be meaningful. So by simply saying something is bold, it doesn't really say anything about the text. So rather, there are a few options. The most common one is to use strong. And so strong has a little bit more meaning. It will do exactly the same thing. You will not notice a difference here. But the idea is that by saying this is strong rather than bold, that means something a little bit more. So you'll see in the future video really what this semantic markup is all about, what HTML5 is trying to do. But for now, just know those are two ways of making something bold. Likewise, there are a few ways of italicizing some text. So if I want to italicize lorem ipsum, I could do the I tag. You can see I have italicized lorem ipsum there. But the better way of doing it is using the em tag, which is for emphasis. And it looks exactly the same. And the idea again is that emphasis means something more rather than just saying I. So we want to separate, and this is what HTML5 did, we want to separate our styling from our structure. So by saying something should be italicized or bolded, that's actually the styling of it. But by saying something is stronger or something is emphasized, that's not how it's styled or how it looks. That is more about the structure of it and what it means. So in summary, we've got H1 through H6. These are block level elements. We've got paragraphs, which are also block level. They take up their own line. And then we've got strong and em, or emphasis. And these are inline elements that let us bold or italicize things. But really what they let us do is call something out for being strong or being emphasized. And our browser just decides to make it italicized or make it bolded. Welcome back. So this video is going to be pretty short. We're just going to discuss how we make lists in HTML. So how do we make numbered lists or bullet pointed lists? How do we have nested lists? This is something that we do a lot on our websites. It's also something, academic papers did a lot and they still do, which is why it was originally incorporated in HTML. So there are two types of lists that we can define. One is an ordered list, which would look something like this. And another is an unordered list, which works the same way, except we have bullet points here. So we'll start by talking about an ordered list, and the tag for that is called an OL, stands for ordered list. And if we just do that and we refresh this page, nothing changes. And that's because an ordered list on its own doesn't mean anything. We have to provide it with list elements, or list items, which is what LI stands for. Every numbered point that we want, every item in the list needs to be an LI tag. So we're going to make a list. Let's do something short. Let's say a list of colors. So red, I'm just going to copy this line. Orange, yellow. So this list is ordered. I refresh the page and you can see I get a list with numbers there. And you can change this with CSS. You can change it to be Roman numerals. We'll talk about that in another lesson. What's important though is that it has an order. So if we copy this, we do the exact same thing, but we change it to be a UL, and I refresh the page, you'll see that I have a numbered list, which is ordered, and an unordered list with bullet points. So just by changing OL to UL, I go from ordered to unordered. Both of them require list items inside. What we can also do, just to show you, we can nest any of the other tags that we've seen, like strong or emphasized. So let's make red bolded, just like that. And you can see red is bolded. Likewise, we can also nest other lists inside of a list. So let's say I wanted to have a list under yellow. I wanted it to list a few shades of yellow. Inside this LI, I can actually add in another, and let's do an unordered list. And you'll see there, this is the first time I've shown you this, you can type the tag name and hit tab and it will autocomplete. So I have another UL, an unordered list. Inside of that, I'm going to name my first shade of yellow, which is sunflower, and then another LI and another shade of yellow, which will be banana. Let's take a look. We've got an ordered list with numbers 1, 2, 3, and then inside of that third list item, I have another bullet pointed list with 2 types of yellow. And you'll see I end up with this nested list structure. So then, of course, under banana, I could do another list, something like, let's do another, this time let's go back to an ordered list. Another LI. I'm really running out of ideas for bananas. Let's just do frozen banana and non-frozen banana. And you can see we get a numbered list inside of a bullet pointed list inside of a numbered list. Okay, so that's all I want to show about lists. We can combine all of these together to make some interesting things. We can bold things, italicize them. We can put a heading before a list. So I could do something like my color list. Very exciting, I know. We're getting there though. This is underlying everything that we do. Every website uses these types of elements behind the scenes. So even though these are not beautiful sites yet, they're not very useful, it's really, really important. So next we're gonna do a quick little exercise. I'm gonna have you build something. I'm gonna give you a little image, have you construct it, and then we'll meet back up afterwards. So this video is going to be extremely short. It's just an introduction to your first real exercise. I have created here in the browser a nice simple web page. So it just contains some of the notes that I might have taken on the last few lessons about internet basics, HTML, the different tags, the boilerplate. So what I'd like you to do is recreate this yourself. So from scratch, make a new file, save it, make sure it ends in HTML, and add the correct markup, along with the correct boilerplate that we don't actually see here. So all the stuff behind the scenes, the doc type, the head, the body, so on. Also make sure this matches up here. Everything should match. I'll give you a short hint because you may not be sure exactly what size heading these are. This is an H2. That's not hugely important, but that's an H2. I'll also go over some of these things here. So we've got bullet points. We've got bolded here. We've got a bullet pointed list inside of a bullet pointed list. We've got a numeric list, ordered list inside of a bullet point, another numeric list inside of one, and we've got some italicized text and some bolded text here as well. So go ahead, take your time, make a new file, start from scratch, watch some of the previous videos if you need to, recreate this. So this video is going to be a solution video. So like all solution videos, you do not have to watch them. If you just want the code, it's in the description. You can just view the file, but I'm going to go through the actual process of writing it here. So the first thing we want to do is make a new file and save it. And I'm going to call this just solution.html. every time we make an HTML document, we create our boilerplate, HTML, hit tab, or you can type it all from scratch. Let's start with our title. Let's fill that in, things I've learned. All right, so next up, we're gonna actually fill out the body. I'd like to start, let's identify the big elements, so the headings on the page. So we're gonna have an H1, and that is going to say things I've learned. Remember, H1 is for the largest thing on the page, the largest heading on the page. So then we also had an H2, and this one is Internet Basics. And then we have another H2. Just for the record, you might see me duplicating things very quickly. I'm not copying and pasting. It's actually all done with a shortcut in Sublime. On a Mac, it is Command-Shift-D. Okay, another H2, this one for HTML. So let's take a look at how this is going so far. Let's open it up. All right, so far so good. Now we need to go in and fill out the list. So let's start with this one. So that is going to be an ordered list. We're going to have 3 list items. The first one is HTTP requests. And then we're going to have another one, IP address. And another one, servers. Oops, I put that in the wrong place. You want to put that below Internet Basics. Let's refresh the page. Okay, that looks good. So now we're on to the trickier part, which is this nasty nested list. So the outer list, this whole thing, is an unordered list. And we have a few LIs, so we've got stands for, and then we have hypertext markup, which is a strong tag. Hypertext markup language. Okay, we have another LI, which is lots of tags. And I'm actually going to finish out, just double check that this works before we move on. Okay, that looks good. So now we're going to work on the nested list. Inside of the first unordered list, we have another unordered list. So just do that right here. It helps to be very particular with your indentation here. It won't actually impact anything, but it will help us just to be able to view our code and know what is nested inside of what. So we have a UL, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 LIs. So I'm just going to go ahead and write those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can copy and paste them, type them manually. First one is boilerplate. And I'm going to finish out the list first. So headings, paragraph, and then we have EM tag with the word EM inside of it, and a strong tag with the word strong inside of it. Just to hammer this home one more time, you've probably seen me do this quite a few times. You can type the name of a tag and hit tab. Very useful. So let's double check this. Okay, we're getting close. Now we just need this final nesting, well, 2 nestings actually, of an ordered list and another ordered list. So that goes inside of boilerplate. So we find that LI. And now we're going to have an ordered list. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4 LIs. We have one that says doc type. We have another one that says HTML. We have another one that says head, and one that says body. Okay, so we're very close now. The last thing we need is the title that goes inside of head. And you'll notice there's a number, so it's an ordered list. So if we open up head, we're going to type ordered list again, LI again, title. All right, and that's all we need to do. So let's just compare these side by side, check if anything is different. Looks good to me. Titles are the same, H1s, H2s, first list, and all of these lists down here. They look identical. Great. So if you have any questions, feel free to take some time, go through the code. Again, it's in the description. This is not something that you'll have to do all the time, creating these nasty lists, but what it really is about, and the reason that I had you do this, is that it's important that you're able to combine tags. You can put a strong tag inside of an li, or an emphasis tag inside of another li, or an ol inside of an li, or an li inside of a ul, and so on. It's important that you get comfortable with the basic boilerplate as well. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Hey there, welcome back. So this lesson is going to be very quick. We're just talking about two tags, the div tag and the span tag. And we really can't talk about much as far as what they do and how we use them until we get to CSS, where we can style things. But I just want to introduce them now because I'm going to show you things using divs and spans in the next few videos. And I didn't do a great job actually of explaining it in the first draft of this course. So I went back and added this in after the fact, after the course was published. I saw a few questions that I noticed maybe I could clear up if I just did a better job explaining divs earlier on. Okay, so let's get started talking about divs and spans. The first thing I'll say is that both of them, as I mentioned, are not that useful until we actually get to styling elements. But what they do is they allow you to group content together. So a div, according to MDN, is just a generic container. So it's a way of grouping things together. As an example, I'm not saying that this is a div right here, but this could be a div. Just a box around some content. It looks like some text here, some images, and some more text. To group that all together and give it a big border, or give it a background, excuse me, you could do that with a div. Again, we haven't talked about how you do that just yet, but the idea is that you can just group things together. So you'll be seeing me use divs a lot in this course going forward. Let me just show you a quick example. So if I add some text here, and this is actually something that one of the students in this course pointed out in the discussion forum that I didn't know about, which is nice. If you just type lorem and hit tab, it will give us lorem ipsum, basically just a bunch of sample text, placeholder text. So I'm going to use this, make two of those, and then also I'll add in an H1. And let's say that this H1, it doesn't really matter, I'll just put anything there, but let's say that this is a paragraph, and I want to group these two things together, the H1 and the paragraph. Let's say eventually, again, we can't do it now, but eventually I want to have a box around these, a border, an orange border, but it doesn't include this one. What I can do is just group them together in a div tag, so div, and save. And if I refresh the page, or actually open it in the first place, it's not going to look different at all. It's not going to look like anything actually, because there is no styling for us to see. All that's happened is that these two things are now grouped in a container, just a generic box, a container to hold them together that we can then go style later. So if I gave that div a background, if I made it have a yellow background, that yellow background would go roughly around this, but it wouldn't include any of this second paragraph. So that's a div. A span, on the other hand, is also a generic container, but there's a key difference. So let me start with an example here. Let's say I wanted to highlight some of these words right here. Ipsum dolor, whatever. I want to make this yellow rather than black. So the rest of the text is black, but I want to highlight this as yellow and make the font bigger or something. Again, we don't know how to do that yet, but the idea is I would need a tag around this. And if I put a div right there, which is a generic container, and I save and refresh, you'll see that it gets knocked onto a new line. And that's because a div is a block level element. So that means that it takes up its own line, just like a paragraph does. When you add a paragraph in, everything after that paragraph is pushed down to a new line. So a div is a block level generic container. If I replace this with a span, this is not going to be impressive at all because you're not going to see anything really. You will see a change here, but it will just look like a regular paragraph. So I'm going to refresh. And there's a container now. There's a generic span around this content that's not doing anything. Unlike a div though, it's an inline container. So span is for basically grouping content, selecting content inline, and a div is another way of grouping content, but it's a block level element. So I know this is a little bit theoretical at this point, or it's kind of hard to understand the utility of, but very soon when we get into CSS, we'll be able to say something like, go find that span I added in and make it 15-point font and yellow. Or go find that div I added in and give it an orange border, or whatever we do, and then we end up with an orange border around this content. All right, great. Divs, spans, generic containers. One is block, one is inline. This video is focused on HTML attributes. Attributes are a way that we add additional information to our HTML elements. So they take the form of a key value pair. You're going to hear that phrase a lot. It basically means a property and then a corresponding value. So that might be something like source equals corgi.png, class equals selected, type equals text/CSS. So don't worry what those do. We're going to see them all in time, but it's this format of some word equals something in text. Mozilla Developer Network has a comprehensive attribute reference, just like it did for elements, but for all of the attributes in HTML. So the first thing you'll notice as I scroll through is that there are a lot of different attributes. And just like with the elements, you do not have to know all of these. In fact, most developers won't use 80% of these. So there's really a subset of 5, 10, maybe 15 attributes that developers use pretty often. It's also important to note that not every attribute works on every single element. In fact, most attributes only work on 2 to 5 different elements. Some of them only work on 1. So this second column here denotes the elements that a given attribute works for. So something like code, which is an attribute I've never had to use ever, but we can tell from here, it specifies the URL of an applets class file to be loaded and executed. Great, whatever that means. And it only works on an applet element, which I've also never had to use before. But if we take something more common, like source, which I'll just search for, you can see that the src attribute works on quite a few different elements: audio, embed, iframe, image, input, script, source, track, video. And we'll actually be using the source attribute later in this video. So the key takeaway, there's a lot of attributes, just like there's a lot of elements, but there's really just a few important ones. And I'm going to start by highlighting 2 of those, which are source and href. And those 2 attributes are really important to images and anchor tags or links, respectively. So let's go back to the slides. So images, really fun and important part of making a website. They're actually very short tags to write, and you'll notice they look slightly different than what you've seen before, where there is no opening and closing tag. There's no inside content. There's no inner HTML or inner text. Rather, we just have this image tag that opens and closes, and then a single attribute. So I'll show you how to do this. Let's start, of course, by finding an image. I love corgi mixes. In particular, I love corgi husky mixes. There we go. Let's just take this image, adorable dog, and let's go to some HTML document. Again, I'm just going to go back to what we've been working on, but this is clearly not some long-lasting site that we're going to really build up. This is just like a scratch pad for HTML. So let's go anywhere on the page, and we type the word img. We do not need a closing tag, so we don't do this. This is a self-closing tag. And then there's a single attribute that we must have, which is src, stands for source, and it's the URL of the image that we're trying to make this tag use. So that URL can be something that is hosted. So this image here, but it could also be an image that I have saved on my machine. It could be in the same directory that I am, or the same folder, in which case I would just reference it like dog.jpg. For now, we're going to deal with these online images. We will spend some more time talking about where we structure things, where we put our images and all of that later on. Save this. Let's open up this file. And there we go. We've got an image tag. So another type of tag that uses an attribute is the A tag, which is how we make links. So the A tag, it stands for anchor tag, is really important. It's how we create links to other web pages. It's how on Google, when you search for something, every single result, you click on it, that's an anchor tag, every single one of those links. Or on some website, when there's all the social media buttons, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those buttons are actually links. You click on them and they take you to another page. So the format is as follows. A tag, opening and closing, some text inside, and then href attribute equals some URL. So I'll show you an example here. We're going to make an A tag, and this is just going to be a link to Google. So we're going to provide that href attribute. Href equals www.google.com. So that's where the link goes when I click it. Of course, if I refresh the page right now, I would actually not see anything because this link is invisible. There's no text, there's nothing to click on. So inside the tags, in the inner content, I'm going to say, click me to go to Google. Okay, so as you can see, it makes me a nice link that I can click on. Also, you'll notice that it's an inline element. It doesn't take up its own block. It doesn't take up its own line and force content onto a new line below it. So it's inline, and this should take us to Google when I click on it. However, it doesn't quite work. Take a look at the URL that it takes me to. File : / this is just the file itself, and then www.google.com. So without going into too much detail, because we cover this a lot when we get to the backend section, what's happening is that I'm on the file protocol, which is what happens when you just open a file. And when I click this link, it just thinks I want to use the file protocol again and just go to www.google.com. However, what I actually want to do is go to www.google.com on the HTTP protocol. So I need to make sure my link is explicit. So when I refresh and I click me to go to Google, it actually takes me to Google because I specified this should be http : / www.google.com. With that said, I sometimes do want to link to another page that is not on HTTP. So I'll give you an example. Let's make an A tag, and I'm just going to call this go to page2.html, which doesn't exist. Go to page 2. And now what I'm going to need to do is make a page 2. And this page 2 is going to be really, really simple. Just a single paragraph. This is page 2. And I save it. They're in the same directory together. On my desktop, you can see I have first page and page 2. And this link just goes to page2.html. So refresh the page. I see go to page 2. I click on it, and you can see my URL has changed. So this now takes me to the exact same place, except it's now page2.html rather than firstpage.html. So we're seeing two types of URLs here. One is called a relative path, which means relative to where I am, keep everything the same and add on /page2.html. Or doesn't matter where I am because I want to go to Google, completely different place. Both of them are A tags. So this type of usage is actually really common. When you have a portfolio site and you have an About Me page and you have a page for projects and your resume and your contact information, those could be all different HTML files that you create, and then you just link them together with A tags. And this use case is also really common if you want to link to your Facebook links and your Google Plus, I guess, if anyone uses that, or your Instagram and so on. So to sum this up, we've got A tags, we've got image tags. Both of them use attributes, and attributes are just ways where we pass information in. They follow this format: key value pair something equals something in quotes. All right, so we have another really quick exercise. This one is definitely a little easier than the last. Basically, it's the same idea. Here's an image. This is some HTML that I wrote, and I want you to reverse engineer it. So take this. This is about my dog Rusty. You do not have to use the same image. If you do want to, and you want to use the exact same image, make it look exactly the same, it's included in the description. So I'll let you decide on which heading this is, what this is right here, what heading this is. Decide on where this link actually goes to. Rusty doesn't have an Instagram. I'm not one of those dog owners, thankfully. I decided to link to just some Instagram that was just dogs of Instagram, I think. So any link really will do there. So again, pretty simple. One image, one link, one list, a few headings, and one weird looking yet painfully adorable mutant dog. Alright, so this will be a solution video. Like always, you can just find the code in the description and download that, but I'll give you a chance to follow along if you want to code along while I create this solution. Okay, so first thing, as always, we need a file. I created one called rusty.html. Create a file, save it, .html. We need our skeleton, our boilerplate. Let's give it a title of Rusty Steel. And then the first thing that stands out is the largest heading, which should be an H1. And that just is Rusty Steel. The next thing is some text that I think should probably be a paragraph. So, hi, I'm a dog, woof. So let's see what we have going on so far. Looks good. So next up, we can tackle the image. So I have a few images of Rusty here. They're all pretty adorable. I'm going to go with this one. So I'm going to copy the image URL. In case you didn't know about that, right click, copy image URL. You'll be doing that a lot anytime you want to use an image in your HTML. So we need an image tag. We set the source equal to that URL. Remember, there's no closing image tag, just self-closing image source equals something. Let's take a look. Okay, so far so good. Let's go ahead and add in some of my favorite places. So let's go with an H4 to start. And let's see how that looks. That looks a little bit small. So that might be an H3. And this really isn't the point of the exercise, so you don't have to spend too much time. Okay, there we go, it's an H3. It's really more just identifying that something is a heading, not so much matching exactly the size, because we can use CSS later on to specify, it's not like there's only 6 sizes of headings. There are 6 different headings, but we can style any of them to be 50 pixel font size, 51, 52, 100, 200, 300, 70. Like we can do whatever we want style-wise, but there are just 6 elements. So again, we're not really working with any style yet. So if we want it to be exact, this is an H3. So next up, we have a nice little list, an unordered list with 3 LIs, the beach, the dog park, and the fire hydrant. These actually are his favorite places in order. So maybe this should have been an ordered list rather than an unordered list, but that's for another day. Let's double check. Looks good. The only other thing that we need now is our final paragraph at the bottom. Make sure to follow me on, and then an A tag. Inside that A tag, we want Instagram. And then I have just dogs of Instagram open Feel free to use any link whatsoever. It really doesn't matter. Let's check that out. Make sure to follow me on Instagram. It is purple because I've been to this link before. So links that you've not visited are blue. Links that you have are by default purple. We can change that with CSS later. All right, so let's just compare again. Looks good to me.